Everything we're going to do now is an imaginary number. Once I teach this lesson, anytime something like this happens, you're going to have to remember it, okay? So again, this is complex numbers. We're going to talk about those imaginary numbers. And there's going to be some things that I'm going to go over quickly. If you have trouble, I'm going to post a video up like how to simplify a radical again, just because those are things that are coming back in. But we don't spend a lot of time on that, but I'll make a little video about how to simplify a radical, just a reminder. Okay, so the first thing that I want you guys to remember is that if you have a negative number underneath, that's a -1. So if there's a negative number underneath a square root, the square root of -1 is I. Because you can't take a square root of a negative number, it is an imaginary number. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what I do. Okay? So the first thing that I know is I'm going to have a -1. The reason I know I'm going to have a -1 is because 18 is a negative. So this is where I'm going to put my answer after I simplify the radical. So I know that the square root of -18, there's a -1. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify 18. If you did it a different way in your algebra class, please go ahead and do that. I will tell you, I know that there are calculators that will do this for you, but you're going to have to show me some work that you know how to simplify a radical. So when I simplify a radical, I do a tree. So I'm looking for two numbers that when you multiply, you get 18. You guys, you could have started with 3 and 6. You could start with 2 and 9. And I am going to circle my prime numbers. So 2 is a prime number. I'm going to circle that. I'm not going to circle 9 because 9 is not a prime number. I'm going to circle, I am going to do two numbers that you multiply to get 9. 3 times 3 is 9. And I'm going to circle. I only care about the numbers that I circled. Anything I didn't circle, I don't care about. When you go into the closet in the morning and you look for shoes, you pull out a pair of shoes, right? You always pull out two pairs, not two pairs, you pull out two pairs of shoes, that's one pair. So I'm looking for pairs of numbers. So 3 is a pair. That means I'm going to wear my 3s today. And that 3 is going to go in front of the -1. And then what's left over in the circle is going to go underneath another square root sign. So let me tell you again. I put the -1 underneath the square root, so I took care of that because I already told you that the square root of -1 is I. Any pairs that I can wear, like I can wear 3s because I have both, I have the mate. Have you ever gone into their closet and you want to wear a specific pair of shoes and you can't find the other shoe? You can't wear those. So I can wear my 3s, and that's why the 3 went on the outside. This one is the lone. I can't find its mate. That's why it stays. Now, what I'm going to do is this becomes 3. The square root of -1 is I. I can't take the square root of 2, so I just leave it, and that's my final answer. The big thing about this one is it's not on how to simplify a radical. It's more on the fact that you know that when you pull out a negative. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing. So I see the square root of -125. So what that means is I see a negative, so that means I'm going to have the square root of -1 somewhere. Once I see the -1, now I can just focus on the 125. You guys, once you get really good at these, you probably won't have to put that -1. You'll be like, oh, it has to have an I, and you'll be fine. But right now in your notes, I want to show you where you get that -1. So what are two numbers you can multiply to get 125? 25 and 5. 25 and 5. 5 is prime, so I'm going to circle it. And then what are two numbers you can multiply to get 25? Again, I'm only looking at the numbers that are circled. What do I have a pair of? So that's the pair of shoes I'm going to wear. So that goes on the outside. And then is there anything left in my closet? Is there anything left in another square root? 5. Because this doesn't have a mate. So the square root of -1 becomes I. So 5 comes down, the square root of -1 is I. You can't take the square root of 5, so you leave it, and that's your answer. How is that? It's basically knowing if there's a negative, you have to pull an I out, okay? If your number underneath your square root is negative, your answer is going to have an I. Now, I've given you a chart of what I's equal. I need you to know that the one that you need to remember the most is this one. You need to know that I squared equals -1. That is the most important one. Out of all of that chart, that is the most important one. That you need to know that if you see I squared, you get -1. So you can break it up, and I'm going to show you how to break it up when we get to number 5. But for right now, I need you to remember that I squared equals -1 is the important. Okay? You ready? Can I go to number 3? What is 3 times 4? 12. What do you think I times I is? It is I squared. So 3 times 4 is 12. I times I is I squared. Well, we just learned that I squared equals -1. So this becomes 12 times -1. And my final answer is -12. Okay. Number 4. When you see square roots and they're both negative, you can't multiply them because they're imaginary. So you can't multiply square roots until you've pulled out the i's. So like I just said, the important thing is if you see a negative in a square root, you know automatically, oh, that's a negative. I need to pull out an I, and that becomes I square root of 20. That once you pull out the -1, it becomes I. Same thing here. This becomes I square roots of 12. You have to pull out that I out of the square root before you can do anything with it. Now, what you're going to do is now we can multiply. I times I is I squared. The square root of 20 times the square root of 12 is the square root of 240. So I times I is I squared. 20 times 12 is 240. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor it. Just like I did examples 1 and 2, I'm going to do my little factor tree. You can use 12 and 20. I use 10 and 24. I don't know why. Usually I just use the same pair of numbers, but I didn't. So 10 would be 2 times 5. Circle. What do you get? What are two numbers you can multiply to get 24? 8 and 3. You can also, in first period, we use 6 and 4. You can use those as well. You'll still get the same answer. I'm going to use 3. And then this becomes 2 times 4. And this becomes 2 times 2. Okay, so we're going to have I squared. So we're going to do I squared times, what do I have pairs of? What shoes can I wear today? I can wear these twos. Is there another pair of shoes I can wear? Yep, I can wear another pair of twos. Those must be in a different color. I must really like those shoes. And then I have the square root of 3 times 5, because 3 and 5 are the two numbers that are left circled that I didn't use. So again, 3 and 5 are left circled. That's why they're inside. They don't have a match. I can't wear those. Now, I squared becomes -1 times 2 times 2 times the square root of 15. So your final answer is -4 square roots of 15. So again, the important part of this one is when before you multiply radicals, you need to pull the I out. You can simplify it afterwards, but before you multiply them, you can't do anything until you pull the I out. Okay. Now I have I to the 31st power. Well, I can't really do I to the 31st power because the only thing that I know is that I squared equals -1. So what I can do is using my laws of exponents, I can break it down. So I'm going to pull out an I, and then I'm going to do I to the 30th power. Because the reason I did that is because 2 is an even number and 30 is an even number. So I need an even number of exponents, or I need my exponent to be an even number. Well, I still don't know. Well, you can ask this. How many 2's are in 30? 15. So we're going to break the 30 up into 15. Do you remember our power of a power exponent law, that we can multiply exponents, like 2 times 15 is 30? Then I have I. Well, what is I squared? -1. And what do you think -1 to the 15th power is? It's an odd exponent, so what do you think? Is the 1 going to be negative or is it going to be positive? Negative. So it's going to be I times -1, and our answer is -I. So I want to do another example with you that's not on the paper. There you guys go. Because I just think that I need to explain that just a little bit better. You want your initial, if your initial exponent is not an even number, then you need to break it up. But let me show you this. This is not on your notes. I'm just going to show you. See how it's already even? So we're just going to start, we can just start like that. So it's just basically dividing 30 by 2 and separating it. Whatever your even exponent is, just divide it in half. So then this becomes -1 to the 15th, and your answer is -1. I to the 15th, see now it's odd. The initial one is odd, so we're going to bring it out. And I just took 1 away. 1 plus 14 is 15. Oh, man. We're going to divide 14 in half. Goes to the 7th. 7 is an odd number, so it's going to be -I, and that's your final answer.